The hunger clawing at Zara Nelson's belly was nothing compared to the ache in her heart as she stumbled down the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1885. 3 days without food had left her dizzy, her once fine dress hanging like a shroud on her diminished frame. The townsfolk averted their eyes as she passed, some whispering behind raised hands, others boldly turning their backs. "Please," she whispered to a woman stepping out of the general store, her voice as dry as the desert wind. "Is there any work to be had?" The woman clutched her parcels tighter and hurried away, leaving Zara swaying in the merciless afternoon sun. This was the third town in as many weeks where she had been shunned. The stagecoach had left her here after she could no longer pay her fare, the last of her coins spent on a single meal 2 days prior. Zara pressed a hand against the rough wooden post of the mercantile porch, steadying herself as another wave of dizziness washed over her. At 22, she had already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned when influenza took her parents 6 months ago, she had been forced to sell their small Kansas farm to pay off debts. With nowhere to go and no relations to turn to, she had headed west, hoping to find work and a fresh start. Instead, she found suspicion and closed doors. A woman traveling alone was already cause for wariness in these parts, but her increasingly desperate appearance had only heightened the townspeople's distrust. "You best move along, miss." The shopkeeper appeared in the doorway, his expression stern but not unkind. "We don't need your sort here." "My sort," Zara's voice cracked. "I only seek honest work, sir." "That's what they all say." He shook his head. "Sheriff's particular about vagrants, best you head on before sundown." The words struck her like physical blows. She had never been called a vagrant before, had never imagined she would be standing in a strange town begging for work. With the last of her strength, she pushed away from the post and continued down the street, each step more uncertain than the last. At the edge of town stood a weathered saloon, the Rusty Spur, its swinging doors emitting raucous laughter and piano music. Zara hesitated. A saloon was no place for a respectable woman, but she was at the end of her rope. Perhaps they needed someone to clean or wash dishes. Before she could gather her courage to enter, her knees buckled. The world tilted, the dusty street rising to meet her as darkness encroached on her vision. The last thing she heard was the pounding of hooves and a deep voice calling out. Griffin Irwin pulled his buckskin horse to an abrupt halt as he spotted the woman collapsing in the street ahead. At 30 years old, he had seen his share of hard luck cases in frontier towns, but something about the way she had been walking proud despite her obvious distress had caught his attention even before she fell. "Whoa, easy there, Thunder," he murmured to his horse as he dismounted in one fluid motion. In long strides, he reached the woman's side, kneeling beside her in the dust. Her face was pale beneath a layer of trail grime, cheekbones too prominent, lips cracked from dehydration. "Miss. Can you hear me?" Griffin gently turned her onto her back, noting the quality of her dress despite its worn condition. This was no ordinary drifter. A small crowd had begun to gather, maintaining a cautious distance. "Someone fetch Doc Morgan," Griffin called out, not taking his eyes off the unconscious woman. "Don't bother," came a reply from a man Griffin recognized as the owner of the general store. "She's just some beggar woman. Been asking for handouts up and down the street." Griffin looked up sharply, his hazel eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his dust-covered hat. "She needs help, Clark, not judgment. Now someone get the doctor, or I'll carry her there myself." Something in his tone, perhaps the echo of authority from his days as a Texas Ranger, spurred a young boy into action, running toward the doctor's office at the far end of the street. "She asked for work, not handouts," came a quiet voice. Griffin turned to see Hannah Lewis, the milliner's wife, stepping forward. "I saw her earlier. She seemed desperate for honest employment." Griffin nodded, turning his attention back to the woman. Up close, He could see that beneath the trail dust and exhaustion was a face of striking beauty-high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and lashes that cast shadows on her hollow cheeks. Doc Morgan arrived moments later, his medical bag in hand, his gray beard and kind eyes a welcome sight. "What happened here, Griffin?" he asked, kneeling on the woman's other side. "Found her collapsing in the street. Hasn't regained consciousness." The doctor performed a quick examination, his expression growing more concerned. "Severe malnutrition and dehydration from the looks of it. She needs food, water, and rest immediately." "I'll take her to the hotel," Griffin decided, already gathering the woman's slight form in his arms. "They won't have her," Clark interjected. "Already turned her away this morning, said they don't want trouble." Griffin's jaw tightened. Cottonwood Springs prided itself on being a growing, civilized town, yet they would let a woman starve in their streets rather than offer basic Christian charity. "Then I'll take her to my place," he said firmly. "Doc, can you follow with whatever medicines she might need?" The doctor nodded, and Griffin stood with the woman cradled against his chest, her weight alarmingly slight. As he moved toward Thunder, Hannah stepped forward and tucked a small bundle into the woman's lap. "Fresh bread and preserves," she explained quietly, "for when she wakes." Griffin nodded his thanks, touched by the small kindness in the face of the town's general indifference. With practiced ease, he mounted his horse while still holding the unconscious woman, settling her securely before him. "Griffin Irwin, you're too soft-hearted for your own good," called out Frank Wilson, the saloon owner, from his doorway. "That woman could be anyone, a thief, a liar, or worse. And she could be someone's daughter, sister, or wife fallen on hard times," Griffin replied evenly. "I'd rather be wrong about helping her than right about turning her away." With that, he turned Thunder toward the outskirts of town where his modest ranch lay, the woman's head lolling against his shoulder as they rode. Griffin's property sat on 20 acres of decent grazing land, with a small but sturdy cabin he had built with his own hands after leaving the Rangers 5 years ago. It wasn't much compared to some of the larger spreads in the territory, but it was his, paid for with honest work and careful saving. As he approached, his ranch hand Miguel Ramirez emerged from the barn, his weathered face registering surprise at the sight of Griffin's burden. "Patron, what has happened?" he called, hurrying to help. "Found her collapsed in town," Griffin explained, carefully dismounting while supporting the woman. "No one would help her, Miguel. She's half-starved." Miguel's expression darkened. He had worked for Griffin since the ranch's beginning and knew well the injustices that could befall those without protection in the West. "The small bedroom is ready. I will take care of your horse. Gracias, amigo. Doc Morgan is on his way." Inside the cabin, Griffin laid the woman on the bed in the spare room, removing her worn boots and covering her with a clean blanket. In the light filtering through the window, he could see that her hair, though matted with dust, was a rich chestnut color. Her hands, while dirty, showed no signs of the calluses common to working women in these parts. Whoever she was, she hadn't spent her life in physical labor. A soft knock announced Doc Morgan's arrival. The older man entered the room with his characteristic efficiency, placing his bag on the bedside table. "Give us some privacy, Griffin. I'll need to examine her properly." Griffin nodded and stepped out, pacing the main room of his cabin as he waited. The doctor emerged some time later, his expression grave. "She's in a bad way, Griffin. Hasn't had proper nourishment in weeks from what I can tell. There are also bruises on her arms that suggest she's been roughly handled recently." Griffin's jaw tightened. "Will she recover?" "With proper care, yes. I've managed to get some water into her, mixed with a bit of sugar and salt. When she wakes, she'll need broth first, then soft foods as her stomach adjusts. Nothing rich or heavy for at least a few days." "I understand." "She's young, I'd guess early 20s, and appears to have been healthy before this ordeal. That's in her favor." The doctor packed his bag. "I'll check on her tomorrow. Send Miguel if there's any change before then." After the doctor left, Griffin prepared a simple beef broth, letting it simmer while he tended to necessary ranch chores. Miguel offered to stay the night in case Griffin needed help, but he assured his friend he could manage. As darkness fell, Griffin settled into a chair beside the woman's bed, a book in hand though his attention remained on his unexpected guest. In the lamplight, with some of the dirt wiped away by Doc Morgan's careful ministrations, she looked even younger, her features delicate and refined. "Who are you?" he murmured, though he expected no answer. "And what happened to bring you here?" To his surprise, her eyelids fluttered, and a moment later he found himself staring into eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. Confusion filled those eyes, followed quickly by fear. "Easy now," Griffin said softly, staying in his seat to avoid frightening her further. "You're safe. My name is Griffin Irwin. You collapsed in town and I brought you to my ranch to recover." The woman tried to speak, but her parched throat produced only a raspy whisper. Griffin reached for the cup of water the doctor had left. "Here, small sips," he instructed, holding the cup to her lips. "Doctor's orders." She complied, her eyes never leaving his face, wariness evident in every line of her body despite her weakness. After several careful sips, she found her voice. Zara Nelson." The words were barely audible, but Griffin nodded in acknowledgement. "Miss Nelson, you've been through quite an ordeal. How long has it been since you've eaten properly?" She swallowed hard. 3 days without food." "Before that, little enough." Griffin's expression remained neutral, though inwardly he felt a surge of anger at the circumstances that would leave a young woman in such a state. "I've got broth warming. Do you think you could manage some?" Zara's eyes filled with tears and she nodded, struggling to maintain her composure. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll repay your kindness, but I will." "We'll worry about that after you're well," Griffin assured her, rising to fetch the broth. "For now, rest is what you need most." Over the next hour, Griffin patiently helped Zara consume small amounts of the nourishing liquid, watching as a hint of color returned to her pale cheeks. She offered little information about herself, and he didn't press, sensing her need to maintain whatever dignity remained after being found unconscious in the street. When at last her eyes began to droop with exhaustion, Griffin removed the empty cup from her slack fingers. "Sleep now," he said gently. "We'll talk more tomorrow." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him, stronger than before but still fragile. "Why did you help me when no one else would?" Griffin paused in the doorway, considering his answer carefully. "Because there was a time when I needed help and someone gave it freely. I'm just passing along the favor." The truth was more complicated. Something about her had called to him, awakened a protective instinct he thought had died years ago in the harsh realities of life as a ranger. But that was more than either of them was ready to acknowledge. "Rest well, Miss Nelson," he said instead, and closed the door quietly behind him. The next morning, Zara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sound of a hammer striking wood. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, until memories of the previous evening filtered back, collapsing in the street, waking to find herself in a stranger's home, the quiet-spoken man with kind eyes who had fed her broth with the patience one might show a child, Griffin Irwin. Her rescuer. Testing her strength, Zara pushed herself to a sitting position, pleased to find the room didn't spin as it had the day before. Someone had placed a basin of fresh water, a bar of soap, and a clean towel on the bedside table. Beside them lay a simple cotton dress, faded but clean. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought fresh tears to her eyes. How long had it been since anyone had shown her such consideration? After washing as best she could and changing into the offered dress, which hung loosely on her diminished frame, Zara made her way cautiously to the door. Opening it revealed a modest but well-kept main room with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and bookshelves filled with volumes that suggested their owner was more educated than the average rancher. The hammering continued from somewhere outside. Curiosity drew Zara to the front door, which she opened to discover the source of the noise. Some 20 yards from the main cabin, Griffin Irwin was constructing what appeared to be the frame of a small structure. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle as he drove nails with practiced efficiency. As if sensing her presence, he paused and turned, hammer still in hand. A smile creased his tanned face, reaching eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. "Miss Nelson. Good to see you on your feet." He set down his tools and approached, wiping his hands on a kerchief. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better, thank you," Zara replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "The dress, was it your wife's?" A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed his features before he shook his head. "It belonged to my sister. She lived with me for a time before marrying a shopkeeper in Tucson last year. It's very kind of you to lend it to me." Griffin gestured toward the cabin. "There's coffee on the stove and some oatmeal keeping warm. Doc Morgan said you should start with simple foods." Zara hesitated, glancing toward the half-built structure. "What are you building?" "A chicken coop," he answered easily. "The old one was damaged in a storm last month." She nodded, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't being entirely truthful. Before she could question him further, a wave of weakness reminded her of her still fragile condition. "You should eat," Griffin said, noting her sudden pallor. "We can talk after you've had something in your stomach." Inside, Zara found the promised oatmeal and coffee, both still warm. She ate slowly, savoring each bite of the simple food, aware that her shrunken stomach could rebel if she rushed. Through the window, she watched Griffin return to his work, the rhythmic sound of his hammer oddly comforting. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, yet there was a watchfulness about him, an awareness of his surroundings that reminded her of the lawmen she had seen in her travels. There was a story there, she was certain. Just as she was finishing her meal, a man on horseback approached the cabin. From her vantage point, Zara could see Griffin straighten, his hand moving instinctively to his hip where she presumed a weapon would normally be. The gesture confirmed her suspicions about his past. The visitor dismounted, and she recognized Doc Morgan from the previous evening. The two men conversed briefly before heading toward the cabin. Zara quickly tried to make herself more presentable, smoothing the borrowed dress and tucking stray hairs behind her ears. "Miss Nelson," the doctor greeted her as he entered. "A marked improvement from yesterday, I see." "Thanks to your care and Mr. Irwin's hospitality," she replied, managing a small smile. The doctor's examination was brief but thorough. He checked her eyes, felt her pulse, and asked several questions about how she was feeling. "You're on the mend," he announced finally, "but you'll need at least a week of proper nutrition and rest before you should consider traveling again." He glanced at Griffin, who had remained by the door. "I've told Griffin what to feed you: simple, nourishing foods in small portions until your strength returns." "I couldn't impose for so long," Zara protested weakly, though the thought of returning to the road in her condition filled her with dread. "It's no imposition," Griffin stated firmly. "I've already spoken with Miguel about bringing extra supplies from town. You're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered." The doctor packed his bag, appearing satisfied. "I'll check on you again in a few days, young lady. Until then, follow my instructions and you'll be back on your feet in no time." After the doctor departed, an awkward silence fell between Zara and her host. There were questions that needed asking, explanations that should be offered, but neither seemed ready to begin. Finally, Griffin cleared his throat. "I should get back to work. There's a shelf of books if you'd like something to read. Rest as much as you need." "Mr. Irwin," Zara called as he turned to leave. I don't know how to thank you. Not just for the food and shelter, but for believing I was worth helping when everyone else had decided I wasn't." Griffin's expression softened. "Miss Nelson, I haven't decided anything about you except that you needed help. The rest of your story is yours to tell when you're ready, if you ever are." With that, he left her to her thoughts and returned to his construction project, the sound of his hammer once again filling the morning air. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Zara regained her strength gradually, moving from oatmeal to more substantial fare as her body adjusted. Griffin worked from dawn until dusk, dividing his time between ranch chores and the mysterious building project, which was taking shape with surprising speed. Miguel, Griffin's ranch hand, proved to be a delightful companion during the hours when Griffin was occupied. The older man shared stories of his youth in Sonora and taught Zara Spanish phrases as she helped with simple indoor tasks that wouldn't overtax her recovering body. On the fourth day, feeling considerably stronger, Zara approached Griffin as he worked. "What are you really building?" She asked directly, tired of pretending she believed the chicken coop story. Griffin paused, hammer suspended mid-swing. After a moment's consideration, he lowered the tool and sighed. "A cabin," he admitted. "Small but sound, one room with a proper stove, a bed, a table, and chair." Zara looked at the structure with new understanding. The dimensions, the carefully placed window frame, the beginnings of a stone chimney all spoke of a dwelling designed for human habitation, not chickens. "Why did you lie about it?" Griffin ran a hand through his hair, looking somewhat abashed. "I didn't want you feeling obligated or uncomfortable. After what the town put you through, I figured you'd had enough of people making assumptions about you. And what assumption were you avoiding by not telling me? That I expected something in return for helping you." His gaze met hers directly. "I don't. This cabin is yours if you want it, for as long as you need a place to stay, no strings attached." Zara stared at him, speechless. In a world that had shown her little but hardship and suspicion since her parents' deaths, Griffin's generosity was almost incomprehensible. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she finally managed to ask. Griffin set down his hammer and gestured for her to join him on a nearby stack of lumber. When they were seated, he spoke quietly, his eyes on the distant mountains. 5 years ago, I was a Texas Ranger. My partner and I were tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in El Paso. We got separated in a sandstorm and I took a bullet. Would have died out there if an Apache family hadn't found me." He paused, seeming to gauge her reaction to the mention of Apaches, whom many settlers viewed with fear and prejudice. "They took me to their camp, treated my wound, shared their food even though they had little enough for themselves. Stayed with them nearly a month while I healed. When I asked the elder why they helped a white man when our people had caused them nothing but grief, he said something I've never forgotten." Griffin turned to look at Zara directly. He said, "The measure of a person is not what they do when the choice is easy, but what they do when the choice is hard. Helping you was hard. That is why it mattered." He gestured toward the half-built cabin. "Helping you is easy by comparison. I have the means and the skills. It would be a poor tribute to their teaching if I turned away someone in need when I could offer assistance." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. "It's not easy though, is it? The town already thinks less of you for taking me in." Griffin shrugged. "The town's good opinion isn't worth much if it comes at the cost of doing what's right." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. "I should tell you my story," Zara said finally. "You deserve to know who you're helping." Griffin shook his head. "Not unless you want to. Your past is your own." "I want to," she insisted. "I've carried it alone long enough." So as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zara told Griffin her story. She spoke of her parents' farm in Kansas, of the influenza that had taken them both within days of each other, of the discovery that her father had mortgaged their land to invest in a friend's business venture that ultimately failed. "I had to sell everything to pay the debts," she explained, her voice steady despite the pain the memories evoked. "The farm, the livestock, most of our possessions. All that remained was enough for a stagecoach ticket west and a small amount to sustain me until I found work." She described her journey west, the dwindling of her resources as she discovered that respectable positions for a young, unmarried woman were scarce in frontier towns. How her increasingly desperate appearance had made her an object of suspicion rather than sympathy. In the last town before Cottonwood Springs, I took a position as a serving girl at a saloon, she admitted, unable to meet his eyes. I thought I could earn enough for a proper dress and lodging elsewhere, but the owner. She swallowed hard. He expected more than serving drinks. When I refused, he accused me of stealing from him and had me thrown out of town. Griffin's hands had clenched into fists during her recounting, but his voice remained gentle when he spoke. And that's how you came to be in Cottonwood Springs with nothing. Zara nodded. I had hoped it would be different here, that someone would look past my appearance and give me honest work, but everywhere I went, doors closed, until you. Griffin was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her story. Finally, he stood and offered her his hand. Thank you for trusting me with your truth, Miss Nelson. Now, I believe we've both earned our supper. Zara took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. The simple human contact offered without demand or expectation nearly undid her composure. How long had it been since someone had touched her with kindness? As they walked back toward the main cabin, Griffin kept her hand in his calloused palm warm against her still thin fingers. Neither mentioned the extended contact, but Zara felt something shift between them, a barrier lowered, a trust established. That evening, as they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, the conversation flowed more easily. Griffin spoke of his years as a ranger, of his decision to leave that life behind after a particularly violent confrontation left him questioning his path. I'd seen too much death, he explained, refilling Zara's cup with coffee. Done too much killing, even if it was in the name of the law. Wanted to build something instead of tearing things down. So you came here and started this ranch, he nodded. Had a bit of money saved. Bought the land, built the cabin, started with a few head of cattle. It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine. It's beautiful, Zara said sincerely. You've created something to be proud of. Griffin's smile transformed his face, softening the lines that spoke of hard years and harder decisions. Thank you. Coming from someone who grew up on a farm, that means something. As the evening wore on, Zara found herself laughing at Griffin's stories and sharing memories of her own childhood that she had thought too painful to revisit. It was as if speaking her hardships aloud had lanced a wound, allowing the poison of solitary grief to drain away. When at last she retired to the small bedroom, Zara realized that for the first time in months, she had gone hours without feeling the crushing weight of her circumstances. In its place was something unfamiliar yet unmistakable: hope. The following week passed in a similar fashion. Each day, Zara grew stronger, taking on more household tasks as Griffin and Miguel continued work on the cabin. Doc Morgan visited twice more, pronouncing himself satisfied with her recovery, though he cautioned against overexertion. On Sunday morning, Griffin appeared at breakfast wearing a clean shirt and his least worn pair of trousers. I usually attend services in town, he explained, noting Zara's questioning look. You're welcome to join me if you're feeling up to it. Zara hesitated. The prospect of facing the townspeople who had turned her away filled her with dread, yet she missed the comfort of worship. I don't have anything suitable to wear, she said finally, gesturing at the borrowed dress. Miguel's wife sent this over yesterday, Griffin replied, retrieving a package wrapped in brown paper from a shelf. She thought it might fit you. Inside was a simple but well-made dress of blue calico, along with a matching bonnet. Zara ran her fingers over the fabric, touched by the thoughtfulness of a woman she had never met. Please thank her for me, she said softly. It's perfect. An hour later, they rode into town together, Zara perched on a gentle mare Griffin kept for visitors. She had worried about her reception, but to her surprise, several townspeople nodded in greeting as they passed, their expressions curious rather than condemning. Word gets around fast in a small town, Griffin explained as they tied their horses outside the white-painted church. Doc Morgan made sure people knew you weren't a vagrant but a respectable woman who'd fallen on hard times. And your vouching for me didn't hurt, I imagine, Zara added, noting the respectful way men touched their hats to Griffin as they passed. His smile was wry. Being a former ranger has its advantages. People tend to trust my judgment. Inside the church, Zara felt eyes upon her as Griffin led her to a pew near the middle of the congregation. A few women whispered behind their fans, but others offered tentative smiles. The milliner's wife, whom Zara recognized from her first day in town, even moved over to make room for them in her row. The service was a balm to Zara's soul. The familiar hymns, the rhythmic cadence of prayer, the sense of community all reminded her of Sundays with her parents, of a time when her place in the world had seemed secure and clear. Afterward, as congregants gathered outside to socialize, several approached to introduce themselves. The milliner's wife, Hannah, expressed regret at not having helped Zara that first day. "I should have been braver," she admitted, her kind eyes troubled. "It's just that after the incident with those drifters last month, everyone's been so cautious about strangers." "Incident?" Zara inquired. Hannah explained that a group of rough men had passed through town, causing trouble at the saloon and robbing the stagecoach office before moving on. The experience had left the town wary of unfamiliar faces. Still, Christian charity should have prevailed, Hannah concluded. "I'm glad, Mr. Irwin showed us all a better example." As they prepared to leave, the pastor approached, extending his hand to Zara. "Miss Nelson, we're pleased to have you with us today. I understand Mr. Irwin is building you a cabin on his property?" Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, he's been most generous." The pastor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "A commendable act of charity. However, I feel compelled to mention that appearances are important in a small community like ours." Griffin, who had been speaking with a neighboring rancher, appeared at Zara's side as if sensing her discomfort. "Good morning, Pastor Wilson," he said, his tone pleasant but with an underlying firmness. "I hope you're not suggesting there's anything improper about Miss Nelson staying at my ranch while she recovers her health." The pastor cleared his throat. "Not at all, Mr. Irwin. I merely thought it prudent to mention that a young, unmarried woman living on the property of a bachelor, even in a separate dwelling, might give rise to talk." "Then let them talk," Griffin replied evenly. "Miss Nelson's reputation is beyond reproach, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me." The steel beneath his polite words was unmistakable. Pastor Wilson nodded, recognizing he had overstepped. "Of course, I meant no offense." "Miss Nelson, please know that our church community stands ready to assist you in any way we can." As they rode back to the ranch, Zara was quiet, mulling over the encounter. "You didn't have to defend me," she said finally. "The pastor was right, there will be talk." Griffin shrugged. "There's always talk in small towns. It dies down when something more interesting comes along. And if it doesn't," he glanced at her, his expression serious, "then we'll deal with it. I won't have you driven away by gossip after everything you've already endured." The fierceness of his declaration warmed her, though it raised questions she wasn't yet ready to examine too closely. What exactly was growing between them? And what would happen when the cabin was finished and she was fully recovered? The cabin progressed rapidly over the next week. Miguel and Griffin worked from sunrise to sunset, and even Zara contributed, painting the interior walls a soft cream color with paint left over from Griffin's sister's visit. By the end of the second week since her collapse in town, the structure was nearly complete, a snug one-room dwelling with a stone fireplace, a proper bed, a table and chairs, and shelves for books and personal items. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed as Griffin showed her the finished interior. The afternoon sun streamed through the single window, illuminating the simple but solid craftsmanship. "I've never had a place that was just mine before." Griffin leaned against the doorframe, watching her explore the small space. "It's yours for as long as you want it. No rush to decide what comes next." Zara ran her hand along the smooth surface of the table, marveling at how quickly her circumstances had changed. From starving in the streets to having a home, however humble, and the friendship of a man whose quiet strength had become her anchor in a turbulent world. What if I don't want to leave? The question escaped before she could consider its implications. Griffin straightened, his expression careful. The cabin is yours regardless, but I hope you'll stay. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Zara found herself unable to look away from his gaze, from the warmth and something deeper she saw there. Before either could speak further, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Griffin moved to the doorway, his posture instantly alert. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice tense. Zara followed him to the door despite his warning, peering past his shoulder to see 3 riders approaching the main cabin where Miguel stood watching their advance. "Trouble?" she asked quietly. Griffin's jaw tightened. "Maybe. I recognize the one in the middle, Wade Simmons. He was part of a gang I helped break up when I was a ranger, served 5 years in Yuma Territorial Prison. What would he want with you? Nothing good." Griffin reached into his boot and withdrew a small revolver which he pressed into Zara's hand. "Stay here. If there's trouble, bar the door and use this if you have to." Before she could protest, he strode toward the main cabin, his walk relaxed but purposeful. Zara watched from the doorway of her new home, the weight of the revolver unfamiliar in her hand. Griffin reached the yard just as the 3 riders pulled up. Wade Simmons was instantly recognizable, a tall man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. His companions looked equally disreputable, with the hard expressions of men accustomed to violence. "Irwin," Simmons called, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "Been a long time." "Not long enough, Simmons," Griffin replied evenly. "What brings you to my property?" Simmons dismounted, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dirt. "Heard you'd settled down, gone respectable. Thought I'd pay my respects to the man who sent me to Yuma." "You sent yourself to Yuma when you robbed that bank and shot the teller," Griffin corrected. "I just made sure you got there." Simmons' smile didn't reach his eyes. "Always so righteous. But word is you've got yourself a woman living here now. Not so righteous after all, are you?" Griffin's expression hardened. "My arrangements are none of your business, Simmons. State your purpose or ride on." "Just passing through," Simmons replied, his gaze shifting to where Zara stood in the doorway of the cabin. "Pretty little thing, bit thin though." "Your business," Griffin prompted, stepping to block Simmons' view of Zara. "What is it?" Simmons returned his attention to Griffin, his manner shifting from false cordiality to naked threat. "I owe you for those 5 years, Irwin. Thought you should know I plan to collect. You want revenge, take it up with me," Griffin said coldly. "But you do it face to face, not by threatening innocent people." Simmons laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Always were direct. Fine, I'll be in town a few days. When you're ready to settle our account, you'll find me at the Rusty Spur." With that, he remounted his horse, tipped his hat mockingly, and led his companions back toward town. Griffin watched them go, his posture rigid until they disappeared from view. Once they were gone, Zara hurried to Griffin's side, the revolver still clutched in her hand. "What did he mean?" "What does he want from you?" Griffin took the gun gently from her grasp, his expression grim. "A reckoning. Men like Simmons can't accept that their choices led to their punishment. They need someone else to blame." "He means to kill you," Zara said, the reality of the situation settling cold in her stomach. "He means to try," Griffin corrected. He glanced toward the distant road. "I need to ride into town, alert the sheriff. Simmons is dangerous." "I'm coming with you," Zara insisted, surprising herself with her vehemence. Griffin shook his head. "It's safer for you here with Miguel." "No," she countered, a new certainty filling her. "I won't hide while you face danger because of me. This isn't about you, Zara. Simmons would have come regardless. But he's using me to get to you. I won't be used that way again." The memory of her treatment in the last town before Cottonwood Springs hardened her resolve. Besides, 2 witnesses to his threats are better than 1. Griffin studied her face, seeming to recognize the determination there. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you stay close to me, and if trouble starts, you find cover immediately. The ride to town was tense, with Griffin scanning the landscape constantly for signs of ambush. Zara found herself drawing strength from his calm competence, the way he assessed threats without succumbing to fear. Sheriff Taylor was in his office when they arrived, a gray-haired man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to Griffin's account of Simmons' visit without interruption. "I remember Simmons," he said when Griffin finished. "Bad business, that bank robbery. Teller was just a kid." "He's dangerous," Griffin emphasized, "and he's got at least 2 men with him." The sheriff nodded. "I'll keep an eye out. But Irwin, you know as well as I do that I can't arrest a man for making vague threats." "I know, just wanted you aware of the situation." As they left the sheriff's office, Griffin took Zara's elbow, guiding her toward the general store. "We'll get supplies and head back. I don't want to be in town longer than necessary." But as they passed the rusty spur, the doors swung open and Wade Simmons emerged, clearly having watched for their arrival. "Well, if it isn't the former ranger and his lady friend," he called, loud enough to attract the attention of passers-by. "Coming to join me for a drink, Irwin?" Griffin positioned himself slightly in front of Zara. "We're just passing through, Simmons." "Shame. I was hoping to get better acquainted with your companion." Simmons' gaze shifted to Zara, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Before Zara could respond, Griffin stepped forward. "Leave her out of this, Simmons. Your quarrel is with me." "Is it?" Simmons smirked. "Seems to me a man who cares that much about a woman has given me the perfect way to hurt him." The implication hung in the air, clear and menacing. Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation, tension building in the dusty street. Zara moved to stand beside Griffin, refusing to be a passive observer in her own fate. "My name is Zara Nelson," she said clearly, meeting Simmons' gaze. "And Mr. Irwin is right, I have nothing to do with whatever grievance you think you have against him." Simmons' expression hardened at her defiance. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But you've thrown in your lot with the wrong man, Miss Nelson." "I disagree," Zara replied steadily. "I believe I've found exactly the right man." The words emerged unbidden, but as soon as she spoke them, Zara knew they were true. In the weeks since Griffin had rescued her from the street, something profound had grown between them, a bond forged in shared adversity and mutual respect. Griffin's hand found hers, his fingers closing around hers in a silent acknowledgement of her declaration. Simmons observed the gesture, his lip curling. "How touching, the ranger and the beggar girl. That's enough, Simmons." Sheriff Taylor's voice cut through the tension as he approached from the direction of his office. "I won't have trouble in my town." Simmons turned, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "No trouble, Sheriff, just a friendly conversation between old acquaintances." "Doesn't sound friendly to me," the sheriff observed dryly. "Why don't you head back inside? Whatever business you have with Irwin can wait for another day." For a moment it seemed Simmons might refuse, his fingers twitching near his weapon. Then, with a shrug that failed to conceal his anger, he stepped back toward the saloon. "Another day, then," he agreed, his eyes cold as they met Griffin's. "Soon." As Simmons disappeared into the saloon, Sheriff Taylor approached Griffin and Zara. "You two should head home. I'll keep an eye on him, but I can't hold him without cause." "Understood," Griffin replied. "Thanks, Sheriff." They completed their errands quickly and rode back to the ranch in silence, both lost in thought. The confrontation had clarified something for Zara. Her feelings for Griffin had grown beyond gratitude or friendship. The prospect of him facing danger because of Simmons had revealed the depth of her attachment. But what did Griffin feel? Had he taken her hand out of shared defiance against Simmons, or was there more to it? As they approached the ranch, Griffin finally broke the silence. "What you said in town about finding the right man." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I meant it." Griffin reined his horse to a stop, turning in the saddle to face her. "Zara, when I found you that day, I had no intention of anything beyond helping someone in need. I didn't expect." He paused, seeming to search for words. I didn't expect you. What do you mean? I mean that you've brought something to my life I didn't know was missing. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. But Simmons is right about one thing: being associated with me has put you in danger. I've been in danger since I left Kansas, Zara pointed out. At least now I'm not facing it alone. Griffin studied her face, his eyes searching. When this business with Simmons is settled, we should talk about the future, your future, our future if you want there to be one. The implication of his words sent a warm current through Zara's body. I'd like that very much. A smile broke across Griffin's face, transforming his features. For a moment, the threat of Simmons receded, overshadowed by the promise of possibilities neither had dared consider until now. But reality reasserted itself as they continued toward the ranch. Simmons would not simply disappear, and his vendetta against Griffin posed a very real danger. That evening, after a quiet dinner, Griffin checked and cleaned his revolver at the kitchen table, his movements methodical. Zara watched him from her seat by the fire, understanding that he was preparing for whatever confrontation might come. You were a good ranger, weren't you? She asked softly. Griffin looked up, his hands pausing in their work. I was effective, not sure that's the same as good. You helped people, protected them from men like Simmons. He nodded slowly. I tried, but the job changes you after a while. You start seeing threats everywhere, suspecting everyone. I didn't like who I was becoming. And now, who are you now? Griffin considered the question, his eyes thoughtful. A man trying to build something worthwhile, a man who found someone worth protecting for reasons beyond duty. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Zara rose from her chair and moved to stand beside him, drawn by an emotion too powerful to resist. Griffin, she said softly, using his given name for the first time. Whatever happens with Simmons, I want you to know that what you've built here, this ranch, this life, it is worthwhile. And what you've done for me goes beyond anything I could have hoped for when I was starving in that street. He set down the revolver and stood, closing the distance between them. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. Zara Nelson, he said, his voice husky with emotion, meeting you has been the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. Their first kiss was gentle, a tender exploration rather than a passionate claiming. Zara leaned into Griffin's solid warmth, her hands resting against his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. When they parted, she saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt the surprise of finding connection in a world that had taught them both the cost of solitude. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching riders, many more than the three who had visited earlier. Griffin moved quickly to the window, his expression hardening as he peered into the gathering darkness. Simmons, he confirmed grimly, and he's brought friends. Zara joined him at the window, counting at least 6 mounted figures approaching the cabin. What do we do? Griffin retrieved his revolver from the table, checking it once more before tucking it into his holster. Miguel has gone to his family for the night, it's just us. Should we run, try to reach town? He shook his head. They'd catch us on the open road. Better to make a stand here where we have shelter. Fear clutched at Zara's heart, but she forced it down. Tell me what to do. Griffin moved to a trunk in the corner of the room, unlocking it to reveal several firearms, a shotgun, another revolver, and boxes of ammunition. Can you shoot? My father taught me to use a rifle for varmints, she replied. It's been years, but I remember the basics. He handed her the shotgun. Simpler than a rifle, just aim in the general direction and squeeze the trigger, but only if absolutely necessary. He met her eyes, his expression grave. I don't want you in the line of fire, Zara. If it comes to shooting, I need you to stay back. Before she could argue, a voice called from outside. Irwin, come out and face me like a man. Griffin moved to the door, positioning himself to one side of it. Stay back, he told Zara, then called out, What do you want, Simmons? You know what I want, came the reply. An eye for an eye, 5 years of my life you took. I figure your life is fair payment. You took that boy's life in the bank, Griffin countered. The law took your 5 years, not me. A harsh laugh echoed in the yard. Always hiding behind the law, but there's no law out here tonight, Irwin, just you and me and my friends. Griffin glanced at Zara, his expression resolute. I'm going out there, barricade the door behind me. No, she protested. That's suicide. If I don't go out, they'll burn us out. At least this way you have a chance. Before she could argue further, the distinctive sound of a shotgun being fired split the night air, followed by a cry of pain from one of Simmons' men. Griffin exchanged a puzzled glance with Zara, then cautiously peered out the window. What he saw made him bark out a surprised laugh. Sheriff Taylor, he explained, turning back to Zara. And it looks like half the men in town are with him. Relief flooded through Zara as Griffin opened the door, revealing the standoff in the yard. Sheriff Taylor and at least a dozen townsmen had Simmons and his gang surrounded, their weapons trained on the would-be attackers. Evening, Irwin, the sheriff called, not taking his eyes off Simmons. Thought you might appreciate some company. Griffin stepped onto the porch, his own revolver drawn but pointed at the ground. Unexpected but welcome, Sheriff. What brings you out this way? Hannah Lewis overheard Simmons planning this little excursion at the saloon. Seems he was more interested in revenge than being discreet. The sheriff gestured toward Simmons with his shotgun. Figured I'd save you the trouble of dealing with him yourself. Simmons, his face contorted with rage, spat on the ground. This changes nothing, Irwin. I'll get you eventually. No, you won't, Sheriff Taylor countered. You're headed back to Yuma, Simmons. Conspiracy to commit murder is a serious charge. As the sheriff and his posse disarmed and bound Simmons and his men, Zara joined Griffin on the porch, the shotgun still clutched in her hands. It's over. She asked, barely daring to believe it. Griffin nodded, taking the weapon gently from her grasp. It's over. The sheriff will make sure Simmons faces justice. Hannah Lewis approached them, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. I couldn't stand by this time, she explained, her expression determined. Not after seeing how happy you two looked in church last Sunday. Zara impulsively embraced the older woman. Thank you. You may have saved our lives. Just paying forward a kindness, Hannah replied, her eyes twinkling as she glanced between Zara and Griffin. Though I must say that cabin Mr. Irwin built you is charming, perfect for a new beginning. As the townsfolk prepared to escort Simmons and his gang back to Cottonwood Springs, Sheriff Taylor approached Griffin and Zara. You two all right? He asked, his weathered face concerned. Griffin nodded, his arm finding its way around Zara's shoulders. Thanks to you and the town. I didn't expect such a show of support. The sheriff's mustache twitched in what might have been a smile. Turns out the town's taken quite a shine to Miss Nelson here, and they haven't forgotten what you did for the Wilkins family during that blizzard last winter. As the impromptu posse departed with their prisoners, Griffin and Zara stood on the porch watching until the lanterns faded into the distance. The night was peaceful once more, the stars brilliant in the clear sky. So, Griffin said finally, turning to face Zara. About that future we were discussing. Zara's heart quickened. Yes, I built that cabin thinking you might want your independence, a place of your own while you decided what comes next. He took her hands in his expression earnest, but I'm hoping you might consider a different arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Zara asked, though she hoped she knew what he was about to propose. Griffin smiled, the same transformative smile that had first shown her the man beneath the serious exterior. The kind that involves a preacher, a ring, and you staying in the main house rather than the cabin. Joy bubbled up within Zara, unexpected and overwhelming. 6 weeks ago, she had been starving and alone, rejected by everyone she encountered. Now she stood on the threshold of a future brighter than any she could have imagined. Are you asking me to marry you, Griffin Irwin? She teased gently. He pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist. I am. Though I know it's sudden, and if you need time, Zara silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her newfound hope and happiness into the connection between them. When they parted, both breathless, she looked up into his face, the face of the man who had seen value in her, when others saw only a burden. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Griffin's answering smile was brilliant in the starlight. "Then what do you say we keep that cabin as a guest house, your cabin for our visitors?" "Our visitors," Zara repeated, savoring the word. "Our home, our life." "Together," Griffin agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. 1 year later, the cabin that Griffin had built with such care welcomed its first guest, Hannah Lewis, who had come to assist with the birth of Griffin and Zara's first child. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, a daughter entered the world, her cries strong and healthy in the quiet of the main house that had become Zara's home. Griffin, holding his wife's hand throughout her labor, gazed in wonder at the tiny life they had created together. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears unashamedly tracking down his weathered cheeks, "just like her mother." Zara, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at the man who had given her not just shelter when she was starving, but a love that had nourished her soul. "What shall we call her?" she asked. Though they had discussed names at length in the preceding months, Griffin touched the infant's cheek with gentle reverence. "Hope," he suggested, "because that's what you brought back into my life, what we found together." "Hope Irwin," Zara tested the name, finding it perfect. A fitting name for a child born from what began as an act of kindness. As Hannah quietly slipped out to give the new family privacy, Griffin carefully gathered his daughter in one arm while keeping his other around Zara. Together they watched the sunrise bathing their land in golden light, illuminating the cabin that stood as a testament to new beginnings. "From starving in the street to this," Zara marveled softly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it's real." Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. "It's real, my love, and it's just the beginning." In that moment, surrounded by the family she had found when all seemed lost, Zara knew with absolute certainty that he was right. The cabin Griffin had built for her stood empty of residents, but full of promise, a symbol of how far they had come and the boundless possibilities that lay ahead.